The dust devil spun lazily across Main Street, carrying with it the scent of sage and distant rain that would never reach Coyote Hollow. It was September of 1885, and the frontier town sat like a weathered stone between the purple mountains and the endless desert, neither fully civilized nor completely wild. The sun was bleeding crimson across the horizon when the first notes of a fiddle drifted from the Broken Wheel Saloon. Inside, kerosene lamps cast dancing shadows on rough-hewn walls adorned with mounted elk heads and tattered wanted posters. The air hung thick with tobacco smoke and the earthy smell of whiskey-soaked pine floors. Cowboys, miners, and drifters crowded around scarred tables, their voices creating a low rumble punctuated by the clink of glasses and occasional bursts of laughter. Then she appeared. Clara May Sullivan stepped onto the makeshift wooden stage, and the room fell into a peculiar hush. She wore a dress of deep burgundy that caught the lamplight like wine in a crystal glass. Modest by city standards, but scandalous enough for Coyote Hollow. Her auburn hair was pinned up in an elaborate style that spoke of Eastern sophistication, though a few rebellious curls had escaped to frame her face. At 24, she carried herself with a grace that seemed almost defiant in this rough place. The pianist, old Samuel Hayes, with his gnarled fingers and clouded eyes, struck the opening chords. Clara began to move, not with the vulgar gyrations some expected from a saloon dancer, but with the refined steps of a trained performer. Her movements told stories of prairie winds and mountain storms, of love found and lost on the frontier. Every gesture was precise, yet filled with an emotion that made the hardest men forget their drinks. In the shadows near the back door, where the lamplight barely reached, stood a figure who might have been carved from the darkness itself. Eli Hawthorne, known to the few who knew him at all as the Silent Ranger, watched with eyes the color of winter sky. His weathered duster bore the dust of 100 trails, and the badge hidden beneath it carried the weight of territorial law. He'd come to Coyote Hollow tracking horse thieves, but what held him now was something entirely different. Their eyes met across the smoky expanse. Clara's step faltered for just a heartbeat, so brief that only someone watching as intently as Eli would notice. In that moment, something passed between them, invisible as lightning in the distance but just as charged. She recovered seamlessly, spinning into the next movement, but her gaze returned to that dark corner again and again. The dance ended to thunderous applause and wolf whistles. Clara curtsied, her smile professionally bright but her eyes searching the shadows where Eli stood. She disappeared behind the moth-eaten curtain that served as stage dressing, her heart racing with more than exertion. Outside, she stepped into the cooling night air, grateful for the respite from the saloon's suffocating atmosphere. The stars were just beginning to pierce the purple twilight, and somewhere a coyote howled its lonesome song. She pulled her shawl tighter, aware of the judgmental glances from the respectable women hurrying past with their skirts clutched high above the dusty boardwalk. "Miss Sullivan." The voice was low, rough as sandstone. She turned to find the stranger from the shadows standing a respectful distance away. Up close, she could see the premature silver threading through his dark hair, the fine lines etched by sun and wind around his eyes. He couldn't have been more than 30, but he wore his years like armor. "You know my name," she said, neither question nor accusation. "It's my business to know things." He touched the brim of his hat. "Eli Hawthorne. Folks call me the Silent Ranger," she finished. "Your reputation precedes you, Mr. Hawthorne, though I wonder what brings a territorial lawman to watch dancing girls in saloons." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Maybe I came for the culture," despite herself. Clara laughed, a genuine sound that seemed to surprise them both. "Culture in Coyote Hollow? You must be new to the territory." They stood there in the purple dusk, two people caught between worlds. She, the educated Eastern woman who'd chosen scandal over submission. He, the lawman who spoke with silence more than words. The wind whispered secrets through the wooden buildings. And somewhere, a guitar played a melancholy tune. "Would you walk with me?" Eli asked suddenly, as if the words surprised him as much as they did her. Clara knew she should refuse. A woman in her position couldn't afford to court more gossip, but something in his eyes, a loneliness that mirrored her own, made her nod. They strolled along the quiet back streets, away from the saloon district's revelry. Neither spoke at first, content to let their footsteps create a rhythm on the hard-packed earth. Finally, Clara broke the silence. Why silent? Eli considered the question. Words are like bullets. Use too many, and they lose their impact. A philosopher lawman, she mused. How unexpected. And you, he countered. What's a woman with your training doing in a place like this? Clara's fingers tightened on her shawl. Perhaps I prefer honest vulgarity to polite hypocrisy. They'd reached the edge of town, where the last building gave way to open desert. The moon was rising, painting everything in silver and shadow. Eli gestured to a bench someone had placed to overlook the vast expanse. I should return, Clara said, but she sat anyway. In a moment. Eli agreed, sitting beside her with careful distance between them. The silence stretched, comfortable as an old blanket. Finally, Clara spoke again. You watched me dance. I did. What did you see? Eli was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, freedom, caged, but still fighting. The words hit her like a physical blow. She turned to study his profile in the moonlight. And what does a silent ranger know of cages? More than you might think. Something in his tone made her want to reach out, to bridge the space between them. Instead, she stood abruptly. I really must go. My next performance— There's no one in that saloon worth performing for, Eli said quietly. Then for whom should I dance? Mr. Hawthorne? He stood as well, and suddenly the space between them seemed both too much and not enough. For someone who sees what I see. Clara's breath caught. And if I were to offer such a private performance? A wild waltz with a silent ranger? The words hung in the air like a challenge. Eli stepped closer, close enough that she could smell leather and sage on him. I'd say that's a dance I've been waiting for, without knowing it. The saloon will be empty in an hour, she heard herself say. The back door will be unlocked. He touched his hat brim again, the gesture somehow more intimate than any flourish of words. An hour, then. Clara walked back toward the lights of town, her heart pounding with anticipation and fear. Behind her, Eli remained by the bench, a silent guardian watching her until she disappeared into the shadows. Both knew that what they were proposing crossed all manner of lines, social, professional, personal. But the frontier had its own rules, and sometimes a wild waltz was worth any price that might come after. The broken wheel stood empty, save for the ghosts of smoke and laughter. Clara had sent Samuel Hayes home with an extra $1, claiming she needed to practice new routines. The old pianist had given her a knowing look, but asked no questions. One of the many reasons she valued him. Now she waited in the dimness, a single lamp burning low on the bar. She'd changed into a simpler dress of midnight blue, her hair loosened from its elaborate pins. The clock on the wall ticked toward the appointed hour, each second stretching like taffy. The back door opened without a sound. Eli stepped through, his spurs deliberately muffled, moving with the careful grace of a man who'd learned that survival often depended on silence. He'd left his duster outside, revealing a clean white shirt and dark vest. The gun at his hip was the only reminder of his profession. You came, Clara said, though she hadn't truly doubted. A gentleman keeps his appointments. He surveyed the empty saloon, especially the unconventional ones. Clara moved to the small gramophone she'd purchased with months of saved wages. I'm afraid we'll have to make do without Samuel's piano. She wound the mechanism, and a waltz began to play, tinny but serviceable. Eli approached slowly, as if she were a wild creature that might bolt. I should warn you, Miss Sullivan, my dancing education ended with the Virginia reel. Then I'll lead, she said, holding out her hand. He took it, his calluses rough against her palm. They stood there for a moment, adjusting to the nearness. Then Clara stepped back, drawing him into the dance. At first, Eli was stiff, counting beats under his breath, But gradually, he relaxed into her guidance, letting her show him how to move with rather than against the music. The empty saloon became their private world, dust motes dancing in the lamplight like tiny stars. "You're a quick study," Clara murmured. "I have an excellent teacher." They turned and swayed, finding a rhythm that was theirs alone. Clara had danced with many partners, polished Eastern gentlemen, rough frontier men trying to prove something. But Eli danced like he did everything else, with quiet intensity and complete focus. "Tell me," she said as they moved, "what does a silent ranger think about on all those lonely trails?" Eli considered. "The next waterhole, the tracks I'm following, whether the man I'm chasing deserves catching or just had bad luck." He spun her gently. "What does a dancer think about in a room full of strangers?" "Escape," she answered honestly. "The next town, whether I'll find something different or just more of the same." She met his eyes. "Tonight, I'm thinking about how strange it is to feel understood by someone I've just met." The music box wound down, leaving them standing close in the sudden silence. Neither moved to restart it. "We should walk," Eli said finally. "This town has too many eyes, even when they're closed." Clara grabbed her shawl, and they slipped out into the night. The moon had risen full, turning the desert into an ocean of silver sand and black shadows. They headed east along the old wagon road, their footsteps muffled by dust. "I wasn't always a dancer," Clara said as they walked. "My father was a schoolmaster in Philadelphia. He believed his daughters should be educated, a radical notion that scandalized the neighbors. What changed? He died." The words came flat. "Matter of fact. Mother remarried quickly. My stepfather had different ideas about a woman's place. When I refused his choice of husband, a man 3 times my age with wandering hands, I was given a choice: submit or leave. You left, with nothing but education and anger." She laughed bitterly. "Neither puts food on the table, but I could dance. Father had insisted on all the social graces. So I dance, and they judge me for it, and I survive." They'd reached a cluster of cottonwoods marking a seasonal creek bed. Eli guided her to a fallen log worn smooth by floods. "My turn," he said, settling beside her. "Tennessee-born. Father died at Shiloh when I was 12. Mother followed within a year. Grief, the doctor said, though I think it was more like she just decided to stop living." Clara touched his hand lightly. He didn't pull away. "Wound up raised by an uncle who wore a badge. He taught me tracking, shooting, reading sign. But mostly he taught me that the law isn't about the book of statutes sitting on some judge's desk. It's about protecting folks who can't protect themselves." "Is that why you became a ranger?" "Part of it." He turned her hand over, tracing the calluses from her work. "Also because I'm good at finding things. People, truth. And what truth have you found tonight?" Before he could answer, voices carried on the wind, loud, slurred, heading their way. Eli was on his feet instantly, hand near his gun, body shielding Clara. 3 cowboys stumbled into view, passing a bottle between them. Clara recognized them, troublemakers who frequented the Broken Wheel, always demanding more than they paid for. "Well, well," the largest said, weaving slightly. "Jack, Tommy, look what we got here. The pretty dancer and her—" He squinted at Eli. "Who are you, friend?" "Someone suggesting you boys head back to town," Eli said quietly. Jack, the youngest and drunkest, laughed. "Suggesting? You hear that? Wade, he's suggesting." He looked at Clara with unfocused eyes. "What's matter, sweetheart? We ain't good enough for a private show." "The lady and I were having a conversation," Eli said, still quiet. "You boys are interrupting." Wade, the leader, took a step forward. "Maybe we want to conversate too. Maybe we got things to say to a woman who shakes her—" He never finished. Eli moved so fast Clara barely saw it. Not violence, just positioning. Suddenly he stood between her and them, radiating a cold authority that cut through their drunken haze. "You know who I am?" he asked. Tommy, the least drunk, grabbed Wade's arm. "That's Hawthorne, the Silent Ranger." "So?" Wade blustered, but uncertainty crept into his voice. "So you're going to apologize to the lady and go sleep it off?" Eli said. "Or tomorrow you'll answer to me. Stone cold sober. Your choice." The silence stretched taut. Finally, Wade yanked off his hat. "Sorry, miss. Boys were just funning." They retreated, stumbling and muttering. Eli watched until they disappeared, then turned back to Clara. "Are you all right?" She was studying him with new eyes. "You didn't touch them." "Didn't need to. Violence is a tool, not a solution." He sat back down. "Though I admit I wanted to when he—" "I've heard worse," Clara interrupted. "Part of the territory, as they say, doesn't make it right." They sat quietly, the moment's ugliness fading into the desert night. Finally, Clara stood. "Perhaps we should—" Eli caught her hand. "Not yet. Not because of them." Something in his voice made her sink back down. "Then where?" He pointed to a natural shelter formed by the cottonwoods in a low rise. "Safer, private." They relocated, finding a spot where the trees formed a canopy against the stars. The ground was soft with years of fallen leaves. Clara spread her shawl, and they sat close, no longer pretending distance. "In the saloon," Eli said suddenly, "when you danced, I've never seen anything like it, not just the steps, the way you made everyone forget where they were, who they were supposed to be. Is that what happened to you? You forgot who you were?" "No." He turned to face her fully. "I remembered who I could be." The words hung between them like a bridge. Clara felt herself leaning closer, drawn by something stronger than propriety or sense. "Eli." He cupped her face gently, thumb brushing her cheekbone. "I leave at dawn. The men I'm tracking—" "I know." She covered his hand with hers. "Just tonight, our wild waltz." When he kissed her, it was with the same intensity he brought to everything, complete focus, quiet passion. Clara responded in kind, pouring all her loneliness and longing into the moment. They clung to each other under the cottonwoods, two souls finding temporary harbor in the storm of their lives. Eventually, they simply held each other, watching the stars wheel overhead. Clara taught him constellation names her father had shown her. Eli shared the night sounds, which animals moved when, what their calls meant. They talked of dreams deferred and paths not taken, of the frontier's promises and betrayals. As the eastern sky began to lighten, they walked slowly back toward town. At the edge of the saloon district, they stopped. "I'll find you again," Eli said. Clara touched his face. "Don't make promises the frontier won't let you keep." "Then I'll say only this. Tonight was worth whatever comes." He kissed her once more, fierce and brief, then walked away without looking back. Clara watched until he vanished into the pre-dawn shadows, her heart already aching with his absence. When she finally entered her small room above the milliner's shop, she found a single eagle feather on her pillow, a token she'd never seen him leave. She held it to her lips, tasting salt. Their wild waltz was over, but the memory of it would burn in her heart through all the long, lonely days to come. Dawn came like a thief, stealing the last traces of Eli's presence from the dusty streets. Clara stood at her window, the eagle feather pressed between her palms, watching the sun paint the mountains blood red. Somewhere beyond those peaks, he was already riding, chasing shadows and justice with equal determination. She dressed mechanically, pinning up her hair with steady hands while her heart trembled. The face in the cracked mirror looked the same, perhaps a bit pale, shadows under the eyes, but Clara felt fundamentally altered. One night, one wild waltz. How could so few hours carve such a deep channel through her soul? By noon, the whispers had started. Mrs. Abigail Foster, the banker's wife and self-appointed moral guardian of Coyote Hollow, made sure of that. Clara saw her holding court outside the mercantile, her voice carrying with practiced clarity. Out all night, bold as brass, and with that ranger fellow who thinks he's too good to speak to decent folk. Abigail's pinched face radiated righteous satisfaction. Though what else can you expect from a woman who displays herself for money? Clara forced herself to walk past with her head high, but each word landed like a small stone. The other women drew their skirts aside, and men who'd applauded her dancing now looked at her with a different kind of interest, calculating, presumptuous. At the Broken Wheel that evening, the atmosphere had shifted. The same cowboys who'd always maintained a respectful distance now pressed closer to the stage, their comments bolder. Wade was there, nursing his wounded pride with whiskey, his eyes following her with dark promise. "Heard you like midnight walks," he called out during her performance. "Maybe I'll take you up on that private dance after all." Clara kept her professional smile, but her movements felt mechanical. The joy she'd always found in dance, that brief freedom from judgment, had been tainted. Every gesture felt watched not with appreciation but with assumption. Samuel Hayes, bless him, played louder to drown out the crude remarks, but nothing could stop the knowing looks, the whispered speculations about what exactly the mysterious ranger had paid for her private performance. After her set, she fled to the dressing area, hands shaking as she unpinned her costume. Through the thin walls, she could hear the talk continuing. "Always thought she was too high and mighty," a voice said. "Guess the silent ranger found her price. One night and gone." Another laughed. "Smart man. Sample the goods and ride on." Clara pressed her fists against her eyes, refusing to cry. She'd known this would happen, had chosen it anyway, traded her carefully maintained reputation for one night of being truly seen, truly held. Was it worth it? The eagle feather in her pocket whispered yes. Days blurred into weeks. The autumn rains came early, turning the streets to mud and keeping folks indoors. Clara's audiences dwindled, whether from weather or scandal. She couldn't say. What money she made went to rent and food, with nothing left to save for the escape fund she'd been building. She started taking in washing to make ends meet, her dancers' hands growing raw from lye soap. The irony wasn't lost on her. The fallen woman washing the dirty linens of those who judged her. But she needed the work. And Mrs. Chen at the laundry was one of the few who didn't care about her reputation, only her willingness to work hard. 3 weeks after Eli left, a letter arrived at the postal office. Clara's heart leaped when young Timothy Daniels handed it over. But the postmark was from Philadelphia, not anywhere Eli might be. Her sister Margaret's careful script covered 2 pages of condemnation disguised as concern. "Word has reached us even here of your shameful conduct," Margaret wrote. "Mother is beside herself. If you had any decency left, you would remove yourself from public view entirely. Perhaps the Sisters of Mercy would take you in, though even they have standards." Clara burned the letter in her small stove, watching the words curl and blacken. Family was just another cage, it seemed, with prettier bars. The scandal might have died down eventually. Coyote Hollow had a short memory for all but the most dramatic sins, but Clara's refusal to show shame kept it alive. She walked with her head up, met eyes directly, and never offered excuses or denials. This, more than the original transgression, seemed to offend. "No remorse at all," Abigail Foster declared after Clara had nodded politely to her on the street, brazenly flaunting her sin. What they couldn't know was how Clara lay awake each night, replaying every moment with Eli. How she pressed the eagle feather to her lips and tasted their kiss. How she danced alone in her room to the memory of his arms around her, teaching him to move with the music. The first snow came early in November, unusual for the territory. Clara stood at her window watching it fall, transforming the ugly little town into something almost magical. She wondered where Eli was, if he was warm, if he was safe, if he ever thought of her. A knock at her door interrupted her reverie. She opened it to find Samuel Hayes, snow dusting his shoulders like age itself. "Miss Clara," he said, hat in hand. "I'm sorry to be the bearer of bad news." Her heart stopped. "Eli?" No. He shook his head quickly. "Nothing like that. It's the broken wheel, mister. Morrison says he's letting you go. Says the town council's been pressuring him about maintaining moral standards." Clara sank onto her bed. The saloon job, degrading as some found it, had been her lifeline. Without it, I argued for you. Samuel continued. Told him you were the best dancer we'd ever had. Brought in more customers than anyone. But he's got his own pressures. I understand. Clara's voice sounded distant to her own ears. Thank you for trying. After Samuel left, Clara counted her meager savings. 2 months' rent. Maybe 3 if she ate sparingly. Not enough to leave. Barely enough to survive. The walls of her small room seemed to press closer. That night, she wrote a letter she'd never send. Eli, I wonder if you knew what would happen when you rode away. If you understood the price I'd pay for our waltz. I want to be angry with you, but I can't. You gave me one night of being myself completely, without pretense or performance. How can I regret that, even as the world punishes me for it? I hope you found the men you were tracking. I hope you remember our dance when the trails are long and lonely. I hope. She stopped writing, unable to finish. Hope was a luxury she couldn't afford. The next morning brought a dust storm, unseasonable after the snow. It scoured the town for hours, seeping through every crack and crevice. When it finally passed, everything was covered in a fine red film. Buildings, people, dreams. Clara ventured out to seek work at the other establishments, but the word had spread. The restaurant didn't need help. The boarding house was fully staffed. Even the less reputable places turned her away. Her scandal was too public, too defiant. As she walked back through the dusty streets, she passed the spot where she and Eli had first talked. The bench overlooked nothing but brown haze now, the desert hidden behind a veil of grit, like everything else in her life. Obscured, tainted, changed. A group of children ran past, and one, little Sarah Morrison, the saloon owner's daughter, called out, "There goes the dancer lady. Mama says she's wicked." Clara kept walking, but the child's innocent cruelty cut deep. This was her legacy in Coyote Hollow. Not the beauty she'd brought to rough lives, not the grace she'd offered in a graceless place, but scandal and whispers and shame. That night, alone in her room, she finally wept, not delicate tears but deep, wrenching sobs that shook her whole body. She cried for the life she'd left behind, for the dreams that seemed ever more distant, for the loneliness that threatened to swallow her whole. And yes, she cried for Eli, for his quiet strength and seeing eyes, for the safety she'd felt in his arms, for the wild waltz that had shown her what connection could be, then left her more isolated than ever. When the tears finally stopped, she lit her lamp and took out the eagle feather. In the flickering light, it seemed to hold all the colors of the desert, brown and gold and rust. She tucked it into her hair, a defiant ornament, a reminder. She was Clara May Sullivan. She had danced in Philadelphia's finest ballrooms and Coyote Hollow's roughest saloon. She had been held by a silent ranger under the stars and lived to tell the tale, or not tell it, keeping it locked in her heart like treasure. She would survive this. Somehow. The wind picked up outside, rattling her window like skeletal fingers. Winter was coming to the territory, and with it the long months when travel stopped and the world grew small. Clara pulled her thin blanket closer and began to plan. If Coyote Hollow had no place for her, she'd make her own. One wild waltz had cost her everything. But in the arithmetic of the heart, she couldn't make herself regret the bargain. 3 years had carved their passage across Coyote Hollow like flash floods through sandstone. Sudden, violent, leaving everything changed. The winter of 1888 arrived with teeth bared, bringing the kind of cold that killed cattle where they stood and turned the desert into an alien landscape of ice and desperation. Clara pulled her patch shawl tighter as she walked through the pre-dawn darkness toward the abandoned chapel at the edge of town. The building had lost its roof to a summer storm 2 years back, but 3 walls still stood, offering some shelter from the wind. Inside, 14 children waited, their breath forming small clouds in the frigid air. "Miss Clara!" Young Benjamin Torres ran to her, his face bright despite the chilblains on his fingers. "Did you bring the books?" "Hidden under my coat, as always," she smiled, producing 3 precious volumes she'd managed to save from her own collection. Though, we'll have to read quickly today. My fingers are nearly frozen. The makeshift school had begun almost by accident, after losing her position at the broken wheel. Clara had survived by taking whatever work she could find, scrubbing floors, mending clothes, helping Mrs. Chen with the endless laundry. One day, she'd found little Maria Chen crying because the town's only schoolmaster refused to teach celestial children. Clara had offered to help with her letters, and word had spread. Now she taught whoever came, Mexican children whose parents worked the mines, Chinese children from the laundry and restaurant, even a few white children whose families were too poor to pay the schoolmaster's fees. The town council tolerated it because she charged nothing and taught in ruins, but the disapproval was constant. Today we'll continue with Mr. Hawthorne's stories, Clara announced, and tried not to let her voice catch on the name. Every Hawthorne reminded her of another, one whose memory lived in the eagle feather she still wore hidden in her hair. She was halfway through The Scarlet Letter, edited heavily for young ears, when hoofbeats thundered past. The children rushed to the gaps in the walls to look. "Soldiers!" Thomas Brennan called out. "A whole troop!" Clara joined them at the window. Not soldiers, rangers, their badges glinting in the weak morning sun. Her heart lurched, but none of the riders had Eli's bearing, his quiet grace. "Back to your seats," she said firmly. "Whatever brings armed men to town is no business of ours." But the unease that had been growing for months crystallized into sharp fear. Coyote Hollow had changed since the silver mine played out. Desperate men had flooded in, drawn by rumors of hidden veins and easy pickings. The Bloody Riders, they called themselves, a gang that had started with cattle rustling and graduated to worse. By the time Clara dismissed the children, sending them home with strict instructions to stay indoors, the news was spreading like wildfire. The Bloody Riders had robbed a Wells Fargo shipment, killing 2 guards. Worse, they'd taken the daughter of a federal judge, demanding ransom the territory couldn't pay. "Ain't enough rangers in the territory to stop them," she heard Jake Muller saying outside the Mercantile. 20 men, maybe more, led by that devil Josiah Cross. Clara shuddered. She'd seen Cross once, when he'd come through town the previous spring. Dead eyes and a handsome face. The kind of man who smiled while causing pain. He'd watched her serving drinks at the boarding house where she sometimes worked, and his interest had made her skin crawl. That evening, the town council called an emergency meeting. Clara wasn't invited, of course, but she could hear the shouting from her room. By morning, a new reality had settled over Coyote Hollow. They were on their own. The Rangers had continued south, following false leads. The territorial marshal was 2 days' ride away. If the Bloody Riders came, there would be no help. Fear did strange things to people. Some fled, packing what they could carry and heading for larger towns. Others drank heavily, seeking courage in bottles. A few, like Clara, simply continued their routines, finding comfort in normalcy. She was teaching the children mathematics, using pebbles and sticks for counting, when she heard it. A name, carried on the wind from a conversation between 2 travelers. "Silent Ranger, they say. Tracking the gang alone. Man must have a death wish." Clara's hands stilled. Around her, the children continued their sums, unaware of their teacher's sudden transformation. She forced herself to resume the lesson, but her mind was miles away, following dusty trails and dangerous possibilities. That night, she climbed to the flat roof of her boarding house. Despite the cold, the stars were brilliant in the clear air, and she found the constellations Eli had shown her, Orion the hunter, eternally pursuing. Somewhere under these same stars, he was riding toward danger. Alone, because that was his way. "You fool," she whispered to the night. "You magnificent, stubborn fool." The next days passed in a blur of tension. Every rider on the horizon might be the gang. Every unusual sound sent people scurrying for cover. The town's few able-bodied men organized patrols, but everyone knew it was mostly for show. If 20 hardened killers descended on Coyote Hollow, their fate was sealed. Clara used her savings, carefully hoarded over 3 years of deprivation, to buy extra food and medical supplies. Something was coming. She could feel it in the air like the pressure before a storm. She moved her teaching supplies to the old mine office, which had a hidden cellar where the children could shelter if needed. A week after the Rangers passed through, she was returning from the well when she saw him. Just a glimpse. A figure on the ridge above town, still as stone, watching. Her heart knew before her eyes could confirm. The way he sat his horse, the patience in his posture, the sense of coiled readiness. Eli, he'd found them, or they'd found him. That night, the wind howled like a living thing, driving sand against windows and walls. Clara lay awake, every nerve strung tight. He was out there, somewhere in the darkness. Had he seen her? Did he know she was still here? Near midnight, a soft scratching came at her door, a sound that would have been lost in the wind if she hadn't been listening. She opened it to find one of her students, Maria Chen, tears streaming down her face. "Miss Clara, please come. Men broke into our laundry. They hurt my father." Clara grabbed her medical supplies and followed the girl through the empty streets. The Chen's laundry was dark except for a single lamp. Inside, she found Mr. Chen bleeding from a head wound while his wife tried to stop the flow with torn sheets. What happened? 3 men. "Mrs." Chen said, her English fractured by fear. "Want information about Ranger? Say they know he's near. They come back tomorrow for answers." Clara's blood ran cold. The Bloody Riders had scouts in town. They knew Eli was close, hunting them, and they'd use whatever means necessary to find him first. She tended Mr. Chen's wound, her mind racing. The gang would tear the town apart looking for information. Anyone who might have seen or helped a lone ranger would be a target. And if they learned about her connection to Eli, "You must leave," she told the Chens. "Tonight, take the children and go to your cousin in Tucson." Cannot leave business. Your life is worth more than soap and starch." Clara pressed her remaining savings into Mrs. Chen's hand. "Go, now." After helping them pack their few essentials, Clara returned to her room. She penned a quick note and gave it to Benjamin Torres, one of her most reliable students. "Take this to the old cottonwoods east of town," she instructed. "Leave it in the hollow of the largest tree, then run home. Don't let anyone see you." The boy nodded solemnly and disappeared into the night. Clara could only hope Eli would find it. A warning about the scouts, a plea for him to leave before they found him. Dawn brought riders, not the full gang, but 5 men with cruel faces and well-used guns. They spread through town like a disease, asking questions, making threats. Clara watched from her window as they interrogated the blacksmith, leaving him bloodied when he claimed ignorance. She was preparing to slip out the back when boots thundered up her stairs. Her door burst open without a knock. Josiah Cross himself stood there, flanked by 2 men who looked like they'd crawl out of nightmares. "Miss Sullivan." Cross removed his hat with mocking courtesy. "What a pleasure to see you again. Still dancing, or have you found more respectable employment?" "I teach children." Clara kept her voice steady despite her racing heart. "What do you want?" "Information." He stepped inside, uninvited, his men spreading to block any escape. "About a mutual acquaintance, the Silent Ranger. I believe you knew him, intimately." The word dripped with insinuation. Clara lifted her chin. "That was 3 years ago. I haven't seen him since." "Really?" Cross picked up a book from her table, thumbing through it carelessly. "Yet here he is, sniffing around like a dog after a bone. Makes a man wonder what might draw him to this particular cesspool." "Perhaps the stench of your presence," Clara said before she could stop herself. Cross backhanded her casually, sending her sprawling. "Careful, teacher. That sharp tongue might get you in trouble." He squatted beside her, gripping her chin. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to send word to your ranger. Tell him to meet you at those cottonwoods where you used to spread your—" "I told you, I haven't—" He squeezed harder. "Don't lie to me. We've been watching this town for weeks. You think we don't know about your midnight wanderings, your little love notes?" Clara's heart sank. They'd seen Benjamin, which meant they'd already found her warning. Cross smiled at her expression. "That's right. We have your letter. Such touching concern for his safety. Now you'll write another, telling him you need him, that you're in danger. His grip shifted to her throat. Because you are. Outside, a sandstorm was building. One of the sudden, violent storms that could turn day to night. The wind howled, rattling windows and doors. Cross glanced at the darkening sky with annoyance. "Write the letter," he ordered. "My men will deliver it. If your ranger cares for you at all, he'll come running." He released her throat. "And then we'll end this hunt once and for all." Clara rubbed her neck, mind racing. If she refused, they'd hurt her until she complied, or use her as bait anyway. But if she wrote what they wanted— "I need paper," she said quietly. Cross gestured to one of his men, who produced writing materials. Clara took the pen with trembling fingers. Outside, the storm struck with full force, turning the world into a chaos of sand and wind. In that moment, she made her choice. She wrote quickly, the words flowing like water, but between the lines any lawman would recognize. She embedded a different message, one Eli had taught her that night under the stars, when he'd shown her how rangers communicated danger. "There," she said, handing over the letter. "Will you let me go now?" Cross laughed. "Oh no, teacher, you're coming with us. Can't have the bait wandering off." He hauled her to her feet. "Boys, we've got what we came for. Time to prepare our welcome for the silent ranger." As they dragged her into the storm, Clara caught a glimpse of movement on the ridge, a shadow against the chaotic sky. Her heart leaped. He was coming, despite the trap, despite the danger. Eli Hawthorne was coming back for his dance. The sandstorm raged for hours, turning the world into a howling void of dust and darkness. Clara huddled in the corner of the abandoned prospector's cabin where Cross and his men had taken shelter, her wrists bound with rough rope that cut into her skin. Through the gaps in the walls, she could see nothing but swirling brown chaos. "Damn storm," Cross muttered, pacing the small space. "Can't track anything in this." "Maybe he won't come," suggested one of his men, a scarred brute called Hoffman. "Maybe he don't care about some saloon girl." Cross's gun was in his hand before Hoffman could finish. "He'll come. Men like him, all noble and righteous. They can't help themselves." He glanced at Clara. "Besides, our teacher here wrote such a touching plea." Clara kept her face neutral, but inside she prayed Eli had understood her hidden warning. The code was subtle, word patterns that meant ambush and superior numbers. But would he remember after 3 years? When the storm finally died near sunset, the world looked transformed. Drifts of sand had changed the landscape, covering familiar landmarks. Cross ordered his men to take positions around the cottonwoods while he kept Clara in the open as visible bait. "Remember," he told them, "I want him alive if possible. The judge's daughter is still missing, and he's going to tell us where she is before he dies." Clara's breath caught. So that was why Eli hunted alone. He'd already rescued the hostage and hidden her somewhere safe. Just like him to ensure the innocent were protected before facing the danger himself. They waited as shadows lengthened across the desert. Clara stood beside Cross, the barrel of his revolver pressed against her ribs. Every sound made her heart race. Was that hoofbeats or just the wind? A rider or a trick of failing light? Then, suddenly, he was there. Eli emerged from the deepening twilight like a ghost made flesh, leading his horse on foot. He looked older, worn by the trail and the hunt. His clothes were dust-covered, and she could see the bulk of bandages under his shirt, already wounded from some previous encounter. But his eyes were the same winter sky, now focused entirely on her. "That's far enough, Ranger," Cross called out when Eli was 20 yards away. "Drop your guns." Eli's gaze never left Clara's face. "You hurt her?" "Just a love tap. Nothing compared to what's coming if you don't cooperate." Cross pressed the gun harder into Clara's side, making her wince. "The weapons, now!" Slowly, Eli unbuckled his gun belt and let it fall. Then the rifle from his saddle, a knife from his boot. He stood unarmed in the dying light, hands slightly raised. Good boy, Cross sneered. Now, where's the judge's daughter? Safe, Eli said simply. Beyond your reach. We'll see about that. Boys! Cross's men emerged from their hiding spots. Guns trained on Eli. 5 against 1, and him unarmed. Clara's heart sank. Here's how this plays out. Cross continued. You tell us where the girl is, and I'll make your death quick. Refuse, and we'll start with your woman here. See how long your noble silence lasts when she's screaming. For the first time, Eli looked directly at Cross. Something in his expression made even the outlaw take a half-step back. 16 men, Eli said quietly. That's how many of your gang I've tracked down over the past 2 years. 16 arrests or graves. You're running out of men, Cross. That's why you only brought 5 here. Still more than enough to... Is it? Eli's voice remained conversational. You didn't find my camp, did you? Didn't think to check the old mine shaft. Careless. Cross's eyes darted around. You're bluffing. Maybe. Eli took a slow step forward. Or maybe I've had 3 years to prepare for this moment. 3 years to think about every possibility, every angle. Another step. 3 years to decide what I'd do when I found the woman I love in danger. The word love hit Clara like a physical blow. After everything, after 3 years of silence, he still... Stop moving, Cross snarled, but uncertainty had crept into his voice. Eli stopped, but his presence seemed to fill the space. You know my reputation. Cross, the Silent Ranger? Do you know why they call me that? Because you don't talk much, Hoffman said, but his gun hand was trembling slightly. Because I don't waste words on dead men, Eli corrected. And you've been dead since you touched her? You just don't know it yet. A coyote howled in the distance. Or was it? The sound was wrong somehow. Too deliberate. Cross's men shifted nervously, their careful positions compromised as they tried to watch all directions at once. It's a trick, Cross insisted, but sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cooling air. There's no one else out there. You sure about that? Eli asked. I had 3 days head start on you. 3 days to send telegrams, call in favors. Every ranger I've ridden with, every sheriff who owes me a debt, every bounty hunter looking for a big score. $20,000 on your head. Cross, that buys a lot of friends. Another howl. From a different direction. Then the distinct sound of a rifle being cocked, echoing off the rocks. Clara felt Cross's hand tremble where it gripped her arm. Boss, one of his men whispered. Maybe we should... Shut up! Cross pressed the gun against Clara's temple now. Everyone stays calm. He's one man, probably alone, trying to... The shot came from nowhere and everywhere at once. Hoffman's gun flew from his hand, his cry of pain sharp in the twilight. Before anyone could react, another shot took the hat off a second outlaw. Marksman, Eli said calmly. In position for hours, waiting for my signal. That coyote call? That was me telling them to demonstrate their presence. The next signal, they shoot to kill. It was magnificent bluff. Or was it? Clara couldn't tell, and neither could Cross's men. They were backing toward each other now, fear replacing bravado. You're forgetting something. Ranger, Cross said, but his voice had lost its confidence. I've still got her. One wrong move and you die knowing you failed. Eli interrupted. The judge's daughter is safe. Your gang is broken. Your men are about to surrender or die. You've lost everything except your life. Question is, do you want to keep that? The silence stretched taut as a bowstring. Clara could feel Cross's indecision in the way his grip shifted, the gun wavering between her temple and Eli. His men were looking to him for orders, but he had none to give. Then Eli did something that shocked everyone. He smiled, not the cold smile of a predator, but something warm and familiar, directed solely at Clara. Remember what I taught you? He said softly. About dancing. Clara's eyes widened, that night under the stars. He'd shown her a defensive move disguised as a dance step, a way to drop and spin if someone held her from behind. She'd laughed at the time, asked why a dancer would need such knowledge. Because the world is dangerous, he'd said, and I won't always be there to protect you. But he was here now. Cross sensed the shift in tension. "Don't even think about—" Clara dropped and spun in one fluid movement, exactly as Eli had taught her. Cross's shot went wild over her head. Before he could adjust his aim, Eli had closed the distance, not running but flowing like water over stone. The fight was brief and brutal. Even wounded and unarmed, Eli moved with lethal grace. Cross was strong and vicious, but he was a bully who relied on fear and numbers. In seconds, he was on the ground, Eli's knee on his chest, his own gun turned against him. His men threw down their weapons without being asked, hands high in the air. Whether there were really marksmen in the rocks or not, none wanted to test it. "Clara," Eli said without looking away from Cross. "Are you hurt?" She pushed herself up from the dirt, hands shaking. No, I'm Eli. You're bleeding worse." Indeed, the bandages under his shirt were soaked with red. The wound reopened by the fight, but he didn't move from his position holding Cross down. "In my saddlebags," he said, his voice strained now. "Rope and badges. We need to secure them before—" His words were cut off by the thunder of approaching hooves. Clara's heart sank. More outlaws. But the riders who emerged from the darkness wore badges that gleamed in the last rays of sunset. Real rangers. Led by a grizzled captain who took in the scene with experienced eyes. "Took you long enough, McAllister," Eli said, finally allowing exhaustion to creep into his voice. "Got your telegraph," the captain replied, "though your directions to this godforsaken place could have been clearer." He gestured to his men. "Secure the prisoners, and someone see to Hawthorne before he bleeds to death playing hero." As the rangers took charge, Eli finally looked at Clara fully. The mask of the silent ranger slipped, revealing the man beneath, tired, hurt, but burning with an emotion that made her knees weak. "You understood my warning," she said softly. "I understood everything." He reached up to touch her face, heedless of the activity around them. "Your letter, the hidden message, but also what you didn't write. 3 years. Clara, I'm sorry it took so long. You came back," she whispered, "just like you promised." "I never promised," he reminded her. "You wouldn't let me." "Then promise now," she said, tears streaming down her face. "Promise you won't leave again." He pulled her down into his arms, holding her against his chest despite his injuries. "I promise," he murmured into her hair. "The hunt is over. Cross was the last of them. I'm done with shadows and silence." Around them, the rangers were efficiently processing the outlaws, but Clara was aware only of Eli's heartbeat under her cheek, steady and strong and alive. They stayed that way until Captain McAllister cleared his throat pointedly. "Hawthorne, you're bleeding all over the lady. Let the medic see to you before you die romantically in her arms." Eli laughed, actually laughed, a sound Clara had never heard from him. "Always the romantic, aren't you, McAllister?" As they helped him to where the ranger's medic waited, Clara stayed close, unwilling to let go of his hand. The stars were coming out overhead, the same constellations that had witnessed their first wild waltz. "So," she said as the medic worked, "what happens now?" Eli squeezed her hand. Now I hang up my badge, find honest work, and court you properly, the way I should have 3 years ago." "Court me?" Clara laughed through her tears. "After everything? Eli Hawthorne, we're a bit past courting." "Then what would you suggest?" She leaned close, whispered in his ear. "I'd suggest another dance. A proper one this time, without the leaving at dawn." His arms came around her, injured or not. An encore performance. "The beginning of a whole new show," she corrected, and kissed him there under the desert stars, while the rangers politely looked away, and the captured outlaws cursed their fate. The silent ranger's hunt was over, but Eli Hawthorne's life, a life with Clara, with love, with hope, was just beginning. The attack came at sunset, when the sky bled crimson over Coyote Hollow and honest folk were sitting down to supper. The bloody riders struck like a plague of locusts, not the 5 who'd taken Clara, but the full force of what remained of Cross's gang. desperate and vicious as cornered wolves. Clara heard the first shots from the makeshift infirmary where she'd been tending Eli's wounds. His eyes snapped open, instantly alert despite the laudanum the doctor had given him. "How many?" he asked, already trying to rise. "Too many." Captain McAllister burst through the door, his face grim. 20 riders. Maybe more. They're hitting the town from 3 sides. Through the window, Clara could see buildings already ablaze. The dry wood of the frontier town caught fire like kindling, sending smoke billowing into the twilight. Screams mixed with gunfire in a symphony of chaos. "Get me up," Eli commanded, gritting his teeth against the pain. "You can barely stand." Clara protested, but she was already helping him, knowing it was useless to argue. "Standing's not required for shooting," he said, checking his weapons with practiced efficiency despite his injuries. "McAllister, deploy your men to—" A tremendous crash interrupted as the door exploded inward. 3 outlaws charged through, guns blazing. Clara threw herself aside as bullets splintered the wooden walls. Despite his wounds, Eli moved with fluid precision. His gun speaking twice, 2 men fell. McAllister took the 3rd. "The whole town's under siege," McAllister reported. "Reloading. They're not just here for Cross, they're taking revenge on everyone." Clara's heart lurched. "The children, my students." "Go," Eli said immediately. "McAllister, give her cover. I'll coordinate the defense from here." "Like hell," Clara said. "You're in no condition." He caught her hand, fierce love burning in his eyes. "I survived 3 years of hunting to find my way back to you. I'm not dying now, but those children need you. Go!" She kissed him hard and quick, tasting blood and gunpowder and promise. Then she was running through the smoke-filled streets, McAllister at her side, toward the old mine office where she'd told the children to shelter if trouble came. The town had become a battlefield. Cowboys, shopkeepers, and even some of the saloon girls had taken up arms, firing from windows and doorways at the raiders who swept through like demons. The bloody riders showed no mercy. Anyone in their path was a target. Clara saw Mrs. Foster, the banker's wife who'd led the gossip against her, cornered by 2 outlaws. Without thinking, Clara grabbed a fallen pistol and fired. Her dancer's grace translated into deadly accuracy. 1 man fell. The other fled. Mrs. Foster stared at her savior in shock. "The church!" Clara shouted. "Get everyone you can to the church! Stone walls!" They fought their way through the chaos, gathering survivors as they went. Old Samuel Hayes, her pianist friend, wielded a shotgun with surprising skill. Even some of Clara's former critics joined their group, past judgments forgotten in the face of shared danger. At the mine office, Clara's heart nearly stopped. The door hung off its hinges. Inside, she found several children huddled in the corner, tear-streaked but alive. Benjamin Torres stood in front of them with a pickaxe, all of 12 years old and ready to defend his classmates. "Miss Clara," relief broke across his face. "Maria went to get her little brother. She hasn't come back." Clara's blood ran cold. The Chen family hadn't left town after all. "Which way?" "Toward the laundry. That was in the heart of the battle." Clara turned to McAllister. "Get these children to the church. I'll find Maria." Hawthorne will skin me alive if—" "Then don't tell him until it's over." She was already moving. The streets between her and the laundry were a gauntlet of fire and death. Clara moved like she once had on stage, swift, graceful, purposeful. A lifetime of reading audiences translated into reading danger, anticipating where the next threat would emerge. She found Maria Chen protecting her baby brother in an overturned wagon. Flames creeping closer on all sides. 2 raiders circled like vultures, laughing at the child's terror. Rage, pure and cleansing, flooded through Clara. She'd endured 3 years of judgment, of righteous condemnation from people who'd never known real hardship. But these men, terrorizing children, this was true evil. She came at them from the smoke like an avenging angel. The first fell to her pistol. The second turned, raising his rifle. But Clara was already moving. She grabbed a burning plank and swung it like a club. He screamed and stumbled back into the flames. Miss Clara, Maria sobbed, clutching her brother. Come on, sweetheart. We're getting out of here. She carried the baby, Maria clinging to her skirts. As they navigated the burning maze, behind them, she could hear Eli's voice somehow carrying over the chaos, rallying the town's defenders. Even wounded, he commanded with an authority that turned frightened citizens into determined fighters. They were almost to the church when a figure stepped from the smoke. Wade, the cowboy from that night 3 years ago, but now wearing the colors of the Bloody Riders. Well, the dancing teacher. His grin was feral. Thought you were too good for us then. How about now? Clara set the baby down gently, pushing both children behind her. Run to the church, now. Going to dance for me, girl? Wade advanced, gun steady. One last performance. Something like that. Clara said. She moved, not away but toward him, spinning low under his aim. Her father had taught her to dance, but Eli had taught her to survive. Wade's shot went wild. Her knife, pulled from her boot in the same fluid motion, found its mark. He looked down at the blade in his side, surprise replacing arrogance. You stuck me. A girl's got to have some skills, Clara said coldly, backing away as he fell. She gathered the children and ran the final distance to the church. Inside, townspeople had created a makeshift fortress. Women loaded guns while men fired from windows. The wounded lay in rows, tended by anyone with medical knowledge. Clara had just delivered the Chen children to safety when the dynamics of the battle shifted. Horn calls echoed through the smoke, not from the raiders, but from beyond the town's borders. Answering calls came from different directions. Reinforcements, someone shouted. The Rangers called for reinforcements. Through the church's high windows, Clara could see riders pouring in from the desert, rangers, sheriffs from neighboring towns, even some cavalry units. Eli's telegrams had done more than summon McAllister. He'd called in every favor, every alliance built over years of service. The Bloody Riders, caught between the town's desperate defense and the arriving forces, began to falter. Their coordinated attack dissolved into chaos as they found themselves outnumbered and outmaneuvered. But the outlaws weren't finished. In desperation, they converged on the center of town, where the makeshift infirmary stood. Clara's heart stopped as she realized their intent. If they couldn't win, they'd take the Silent Ranger with them. She was running before conscious thought formed, leaving the relative safety of the church. Others followed. Townspeople who'd found courage in the fight, who'd decided that some things were worth risking everything for. The scene at the infirmary was devastating. The building's front was gone, blown away by dynamite. Eli stood in the ruins, one arm hanging useless, his gun speaking death to any who approached. Bodies littered the ground, but more kept coming. Clara saw him stagger, saw the blood soaking through his clothes, saw the moment when his strength finally began to fail. A raider raised his rifle for the killing shot. No! Clara's scream tore from her throat as she fired. The raider spun and fell, but there were too many, pressing in from all sides. Then the townspeople were there. Samuel Hayes and his shotgun, Mrs. Foster with a commandeered rifle, the blacksmith swinging his hammer like a weapon of legend. Even Clara's students, the older ones who'd refused to stay sheltered, throwing rocks and bottles with desperate accuracy. The battle became a melee, all strategy lost in the savage struggle for survival. Clara fought her way to Eli, covering him as he reloaded with shaking hands. I told you to stay safe, he gasped. And I told you I'm done with being left behind, she retorted, firing at an approaching outlaw. They stood back to back in the ruins, the dancer and the ranger, making their stand. Around them, the town they'd both called home, the town that had judged and sheltered them in equal measure, fought with the fury of people defending not just buildings, but a way of life. The tide turned with the cavalry's charge. Professional soldiers swept through the outlaw ranks like a scythe through wheat. What had been a battle became a rout. The surviving Bloody Riders threw down their weapons or fled into the desert, where mounted rangers waited to run them down. As the last shots faded, An eerie silence fell over Coyote Hollow. The town stood, but barely. Half the buildings were gone or damaged. The air was thick with smoke and the copper scent of blood, but they'd survived. Clara supported Eli as he finally allowed his legs to give out, sinking to the ground. His face was pale as parchment, but his eyes were clear and focused on her. "You saved me," he whispered. "We saved each other," she corrected, cradling his head in her lap. "The whole town saved itself." Captain McAllister appeared, soot-stained but steady. "Medics are coming. The gang's finished, dead or captured. It's over." Eli managed a weak smile. "Good. I'm tired of chasing ghosts." He looked up at Clara. "Ready for that new beginning now?" She smoothed his hair back, tears cutting tracks through the dirt on her face. "Past ready, but first, you need to stop getting shot. It's becoming a bad habit." "I'll work on it," he promised, eyes drifting closed. "Clara?" "Yes? Thank you for the dance." She held him as the medics arrived, as the town began the long work of healing and rebuilding. The sun set on destruction, but Clara knew it would rise on hope. They'd faced the darkness and emerged into light. The wild waltz was over. The Encore had been paid in blood and courage. Now, finally, they could write a new song altogether. Dawn came gentle as a blessing, painting the battered town in shades of rose and gold. Clara hadn't left Eli's side through the long night, watching each breath as if her vigilance alone could keep him anchored to life. The doctor, summoned from Fort Grant along with the cavalry, had worked for hours, extracting bullets and stitching wounds that would have killed a lesser man. "He's stable, Doctor," Morrison had finally declared near midnight, "but it'll be touch and go for a few days. He's lost a lot of blood." Now, as the first rays of sun touched Eli's face, his eyes fluttered open. For a moment he seemed disoriented. Then his gaze found Clara and softened. "Still here?" he whispered, voice rough. "Where else would I be?" She squeezed his hand gently. "The doctor says you'll live, though you'll have some impressive new scars, to match the old ones." He tried to shift and winced. "The town? Standing, scarred, like you, but standing." Clara helped him sip water from a tin cup. 14 dead, mostly outlaws, too many wounded to count, but we survived." Through the window, they could hear the sounds of rebuilding already beginning. Hammers and saws, voices calling instructions. Coyote Hollow might be down, but it wasn't defeated. "The children?" Eli asked. "All safe. Benjamin Torres is being hailed as a hero for protecting the younger ones. Maria Chen wants to know when you'll be well enough for her to bring you soup." Clara smiled. "The whole town wants to thank you. Actually, funny how facing death together changes perspectives." As if to prove her point, the door opened quietly, and Mrs. Foster peered in. The banker's wife looked nothing like her usually pristine self. Her dress was torn and soot-stained, her carefully arranged hair hanging loose. "I don't mean to intrude," she said hesitantly. I wanted to." She took a breath and met Clara's eyes directly. "I wanted to apologize for everything, the things I said, the way I treated you. It was wrong. When you saved my life yesterday, after how I'd wronged you." Tears tracked down her cheeks. "I'm ashamed." Clara felt 3 years of hurt and anger rise up, then dissolve like morning mist. "We all did what we had to do, Mrs. Foster. That's what frontier folk do. We survive, and we help each other survive. You're more gracious than I deserve." "Mrs. Foster set a basket on the table. "Fresh bread and preserves from what's left of my kitchen, the least I can do." She glanced at Eli. "Take care of him, Miss Sullivan. This town needs both of you." After she left, Eli squeezed Clara's hand. "That must have cost her. Pride's expensive out here." Clara said, "Sometimes you have to choose between it and survival." Over the next days, a stream of visitors came through. Cowboys who'd mocked Clara's dancing now tipped their hats respectfully. Miners who'd made crude jokes brought little gifts. A carved wooden bird, a polished stone, small tokens of appreciation and regret. Even Wade's former companions came to pay respects, shamefaced and subdued. Samuel Hayes visited daily, bringing his fiddle to play soft melodies that seemed to speed healing. Figure if music could bring you two together, might help knit him back up, he said with a wink. On the fourth day, Eli was strong enough to sit up, and Clara finally felt she could breathe fully again. They were sharing a quiet moment when Captain McAllister arrived with unexpected news. "Got a telegram from the territorial governor," he announced. "In recognition of your service. Hawthorne, you're being offered the position of town marshal right here in Coyote Hollow. Full backing of the territory, decent salary, and," he glanced at Clara, "a house comes with the job." Eli was quiet for a long moment. "I'd need to think about it. Think fast. Governor wants an answer by week's end." McAllister touched his hat brim to Clara and left. "You don't want it?" Clara asked softly. "I want to know what you want," Eli replied. "We've danced around each other long enough. Clara, if I take this job, I need to know you'll stay too. Not as the woman who waited 3 years, but as my wife, my partner in everything." Clara's heart thundered, but she kept her voice steady. "That's not a very romantic proposal, Marshal Hawthorne. I'm lying in a bed held together by stitches and stubbornness. Romance will have to wait." But his eyes were intense, burning with 3 years of suppressed longing. "Marry me, Clara. Let me wake up every morning knowing you're there. Let me spend my life proving that our wild waltz was just the beginning." "And if I say yes?" she teased gently. "What then? Do I become a proper marshal's wife, hosting tea parties and pretending I never danced in a saloon?" "You become yourself," Eli said firmly. "The woman who teaches children no one else will teach, who saves lives with her courage, who dances like freedom itself when the mood takes her." I fell in love with Clara Sullivan, not some notion of propriety. Clara leaned down and kissed him carefully, mindful of his injuries. "Then yes," she whispered against his lips. "Yes to all of it." When she pulled back, Eli was smiling, a real smile that transformed his weathered features. "Good, because I already told McAllister I'd take the job. Eli Hawthorne." She swatted his shoulder gently. "What if I'd said no? Then I'd have convinced you. I can be very persuasive when properly motivated." He sobered slightly. "Clara, it won't be easy. The town's changing. But slowly. There'll still be talk. Judgment." "Let them talk," Clara interrupted. "I've survived their worst. Besides," she smiled, "I'll be too busy to care. The school needs rebuilding, and I intend to make it official this time. A real school for all children, regardless of background. The town council might object. Then the town marshal will have to convince them otherwise." They were still discussing plans when a commotion arose outside. Through the window, Clara could see a crowd gathering in the street. At its center stood a distinguished older man in a federal judge's robes, a young woman at his side. "Judge Patterson," Clara breathed, "and his daughter Elizabeth." They watched as the judge addressed the crowd, publicly thanking the town for their courage and sacrifice. Elizabeth Patterson, barely 18 and still showing the effects of her ordeal, stood straight and proud as she added her own thanks. "My father offers rewards," they heard her clear voice carry. "But I know gold can't repay what you've given. You risked everything for a stranger. That's the true spirit of the frontier, not lawlessness, but law upheld by ordinary people doing extraordinary things." Later, the judge visited Eli personally. "I owe you my daughter's life," he said simply. "Name your reward." "I've got my reward," Eli replied, taking Clara's hand. "But if you're offering, the town could use help rebuilding. A new school especially. My fiancé has plans." Judge Patterson studied Clara with interest. "The dancing teacher who became a warrior. Elizabeth told me about you, how you saved the Chen children, fought beside the men. You have my full support, Miss Sullivan, and my gratitude." That evening, as the sun set on a town already showing signs of resurrection, Clara and Eli finally had their dance. He could barely stand, leaning heavily on her. but they swayed together in the small room while Samuel played a waltz on his fiddle outside the window. "Not quite as wild as our first," Eli murmured. "No," Clara agreed. "Better. This one doesn't end at dawn." They moved slowly, carefully, but with the same connection that had sparked between them 3 years before. Around them, Coyote Hollow was transforming, from a place of judgment to one of community, from isolation to belonging. "I've been thinking," Eli said as they danced, "about the future. Being marshal is good work, but in a few years, when the town settled, maybe we could have that ranch we talked about under the stars, raise horses and children with equal wildness." Clara laughed, the sound bright as water in the desert. "Children, already planning our family. Marshall?" "Been planning it for 3 years," he admitted. "Every cold night on the trail. I'd picture coming home to you, to young ones with your grace and my stubbornness." "Heaven help us all," Clara said, but she was smiling. "Yes to that too. Yes to all of it." They danced until Eli's strength gave out, then sat together watching the stars appear. The same constellations that had witnessed their beginning now blessed their commitment. Tomorrow would bring challenges, rebuilding, establishing new order, creating the life they'd dreamed of. But tonight was theirs. "No more leaving at dawn," Clara said softly. "No more leaving at all," Eli promised. "The Silent Ranger is retired. From now on, I'm just Eli Hawthorne, Marshal of Coyote Hollow. Husband to the bravest woman in the territory. Not yet husband," Clara corrected. "We need a wedding first. Think the town's ready for that scandal? A former saloon dancer marrying their marshal? After what we've all been through, I think they're ready for a celebration." Eli pulled her closer. "Besides, anyone who objects can answer to me." Clara rested her head on his shoulder, feeling the steady beat of his heart. "A dancer's one wild waltz with the Silent Ranger," she murmured. "Who would have thought it would lead here?" "I did," Eli said simply. "From the moment I saw you on that stage, bringing beauty to a hard place, I knew you were my future. Just took me a while to clear the path." Outside, Coyote Hollow settled into sleep, its scars hidden by darkness but its spirit unbroken. The town had been tested by fire and violence, but it had emerged stronger, more unified, and at its heart, two souls who'd found each other across years and miles, prepared to build something new from the ashes of the old. Their wild waltz was ending, but their life together, their true dance, was about to begin. The morning mist clung to the desert floor like gossamer silk, and Eli Hawthorne stood at the eastern edge of Coyote Hollow, watching the sun paint the mountains in shades of copper and gold. 6 months had passed since the battle that nearly destroyed the town. 6 months of healing, rebuilding, and transforming, both for the settlement and for himself. His marshal's badge caught the early light as he adjusted his gun belt, the weight of it familiar now, but different from his ranger's star. This badge meant roots, community, staying instead of chasing. Behind him, the town stirred to life, hammers already ringing where new buildings rose from the ashes of the old. "You're up early." He turned to find Clara approaching, wrapped in a shawl against the morning chill, even in simple calico. She moved with that dancer's grace that had first captured his heart. The wedding band on her finger, a simple gold circle they'd exchanged 3 months prior, gleamed softly. "Old habits," he said, drawing her close. "Besides, I wanted to check the eastern approach. Word is there's a new gang forming up in the Superstition Mountains. Always the lawman." Clara murmured against his chest. "Even when you promised to hang up your spurs." "I promised to stop chasing shadows across the territory," he corrected gently. "Protecting our home is different." Our home. The word still felt like a miracle. The marshal's house was modest but solid, with rooms Clara had transformed with curtains and wildflowers, books and music. More importantly, it was just down the street from the new schoolhouse, built with funds from Judge Patterson and the sweat of the townspeople. "Will you be late tonight?" Clara asked. "The children are preparing their recital for Friday, and they'd love to show you their progress." "Wouldn't miss it," He kissed her forehead. Maria Chen's been practicing that poem for weeks, as if summoned by her name. Maria appeared around the corner, her little brother in tow. "Marshal Eli, Miss Clara. Mama says to tell you the laundry is ready, and she's made extra dumplings for lunch." The Chen family had not only stayed, but thrived, their business expanding as the town grew. It was a pattern repeated throughout Coyote Hollow. What had once been a place of judgment and division was slowly becoming something more inclusive, more hopeful. "Tell your mama we'll be by later," Clara said, producing a penny candy for each child from her pocket. They scampered off with thanks, and she turned back to Eli. "I should go. 28 students now, and more arriving with each wagon train. The town council still grumbling about the expense? Less since Mrs. Foster joined our side." Clara's smile held mischief. "Amazing how a near-death experience and a public apology can change perspectives. She's our fiercest advocate now." They walked together toward the center of town, nodding to early risers. The blacksmith, his arm still scarred from the battle, raised his hammer in greeting. Samuel Hayes, sweeping the porch of his new music shop, called out a cheerful good morning. Even the saloon girls, heading home after the night shift, exchanged respectful nods with the marshal and his wife. At the schoolhouse, they paused. Through the windows, they could see the neat rows of desks, the chalkboard covered with Clara's careful writing, the books donated from across the territory as word spread of their inclusive school. "This is what you've given them," Eli said softly. "Hope, a future beyond what they were born to." "We've given them," Clara corrected. "None of this would have been possible without the town's protection, without your badge keeping the peace." She squeezed his hand. "Partners, remember?" Before he could respond, a dust cloud on the horizon caught his attention. Riders approaching, moving fast. His hand moved instinctively to his gun, body shifting to shield Clara. But as the riders grew closer, he relaxed. Rangers, a full patrol, led by Captain McAllister himself. "Hawthorne," McAllister called as they reined in. "Good to see you vertical and married, in that order." "Captain," Eli touched his hat brim, "what brings you to our quiet town?" "Hardly quiet, from what I hear. Model of frontier progress, more like." McAllister dismounted, his expression growing serious. "We're tracking those superstition boys you've been hearing about. Thought you might have intelligence." For the next hour, Eli shared what he knew while Clara taught her students. He found himself constantly aware of her presence through the schoolhouse windows, the way she gestured as she explained concepts, how she knelt beside struggling students, the joy on children's faces when understanding dawned. "You've gone soft, Hawthorne," McAllister observed, following his gaze. "Time was, nothing could distract you from the hunt." "Time was, I had nothing to live for, but the hunt," Eli replied. "Now I've got something to protect. Makes a man harder in some ways, softer in others." McAllister nodded slowly. "The offer stands, you know. The Rangers would take you back in a heartbeat. The territory's growing wild again. Could use men like you. I'm needed here." Eli's voice was firm. "This is my post now." After the Rangers left, armed with information and promises of cooperation, Eli made his rounds through town. The routine was still new enough to feel like choice rather than obligation. He mediated a dispute over water rights, investigated a theft that turned out to be a misunderstanding, helped raise a barn frame for a new family. Everywhere he went, he saw Clara's influence, the woman at the general store who now stocked books alongside beans and bullets, the former saloon girl teaching sewing to young women, the mixed groups of children playing together in the streets, boundaries of race and class blurring. As afternoon shadows lengthened, he found himself back at the schoolhouse just as classes ended. Children poured out like water from a dam, their voices bright with released energy. Clara emerged last, looking tired but satisfied. "Good day," he asked, taking the books from her arms. Benjamin Torres solved a mathematics problem that's been puzzling him for weeks. Sarah Morrison read her first complete sentence, and the Jackson twins only fought twice. She smiled. "A very good day." They walked home together, discussing plans for the town meeting that night. There was talk of bringing in a permanent doctor, establishing a proper bank, maybe even a newspaper. Growth brought challenges, but also opportunities. "Eli," Clara said suddenly, "do you ever regret it? Giving up the freedom of the trail for all this domesticity?" He stopped walking, turning to face her fully. "Do you know what I thought about all those nights alone under the stars? Exactly this, walking home with you, talking about our day, building something that matters." He touched her cheek gently. The trail was never freedom, Clara. It was searching. This is finding. She kissed him then, right there in the middle of Main Street, in full view of anyone who cared to look. 3 years ago, such a display would have scandalized the town. Now, a few people smiled and went about their business. That evening, after the town meeting where progress was debated and plans were laid, they stood again under the cottonwoods where their story had truly begun. The trees had grown fuller, offering better shade and shelter, like the town, like them. "Dance with me," Clara said suddenly. "Here? Now? Why not? We're alone. There's moonlight, and I can hum a waltz as well as anyone." So they danced, there in the spot where they'd first kissed, first made promises they couldn't keep, first glimpsed what they could be together. But this dance was different, slower, deeper, seasoned by trials survived and joys shared. "I've been thinking," Clara said as they swayed together, "about what you said, about children." Eli's arms tightened around her. "And I think it's time. This town needs more than rebuilding. It needs new life, new hope." She looked up at him, starlight reflected in her eyes. "Besides, our children would have the best of both worlds, your courage and my grace. Your courage and my stubbornness, more like." Eli laughed. "Heaven help their teachers. I'll be their teacher." Clara reminded him, "At least at first, though I pity them having the marshal for a father. No sneaking out after dark for them. They'll find ways. Children always do." He spun her gently, marveling again at how perfectly she fit in his arms. "Are you sure? It'll change everything." "Everything's already changed," Clara pointed out. "We've gone from stranger to scandal to pillars of the community. What's one more transformation?" They danced until the moon was high, planning a future that would have seemed impossible during those 3 years of separation. Children who would grow up in a town that judged less and accepted more. A legacy built not on leaving, but on staying. Not on hunting, but on building. As they finally walked home, Eli felt the eagle feather Clara still wore in her hair, their talisman, their reminder of wild waltzes and wilder hopes. "No regrets?" he asked softly. "None," Clara said firmly. "Our dance was worth every step, every turn, every moment of pain that brought us here." The stars wheeled overhead, same as they had that first night, but everything beneath them had changed. The silent ranger had found his voice in the laughter of children and the quiet conversations of partnership. The dancer had found her stage in a schoolhouse, where every lesson was a performance of hope. And in Coyote Hollow, where the desert met the mountains and dreams carved homes from dust and determination. Their story continued, not with the wild abandon of that first waltz, but with the steady rhythm of lives intertwined, of love proven through trials, of a future bright with promise. Their dance would never truly end. It would simply transform, like the town around them, into something richer, deeper, and infinitely more beautiful than either could have imagined when a silent ranger first watched a lonely dancer bring grace to a hard place. The music of their lives played on, and they moved to its rhythm together, step by step, into whatever dawn awaited. Thank you for listening to this tale from the Wild West. Where are you enjoying this story from? Leave a comment below and let's connect across the miles. Don't forget to subscribe to the From Wild West channel and share your thoughts about Clara and Eli's journey. Did their love story touch your heart? What was your favorite moment? Your comments help bring these frontier tales to life.